Welcome back and thank you for staying with Morning Express. In case you're just joining us, we have our eye and our pulse on the economy, just interrogating the latest developments around the debacle surrounding the latest loan from the IMF, even after they approved that loan to Kenya, roughly 256 billion Kenya shillings. Joining us in studio, Dr. Churchill Sauke, who's a governance expert, Stephen Mwakesi, who's a public policy analyst, and via way of Zoom, Bunyasi Sakwa, who's the Nambale Member of Parliament and an astute economist as well. So, gentlemen, we're interrogating the lack of accountability thereof in terms of the amount of funds that are siphoned from the government's coffers. Talk to us about this, Mwakesi, because in one way or the other, the laws are definitely in place. But in terms of enforcing this, the government has sort of failed in one way or the other. The president just recently going on record mentioning that we might be losing roughly 2 billion shillings per day in corruption. What's your take on this?
I think one thing that we have to thank the government for going to IMF is because part of the conditionalities that have been set will definitely have to push the government to do certain things to enhance accountability. One of the things that they've been asked to do by the IMF is to implement what is called the Access to Information Act. Now, we have an act that has been in place since 2016, but right now, if you want to know how much government is spending or what agency has been doing in different aspects in terms of utilization of their budgets, you will never receive any feedback from them as a matter of requirement of the law. So one of the conditions under IMF is that the government must implement the Access to Information Act so that people can have access to how exactly these institutions are operating. Secondly, there's a requirement that they must come up with a very robust framework that will prevent conflict of interest, right, in terms of state actors, so that if you're working for government, you cannot be eating from the same government at the same time. Okay. And there are also, there's been a requirement for enhancement of anti-bribery and also money laundering within the system that is within Kenya. And part of the funds that will be given are to actually enable the state of Kenya to do this. And the expertise will also be coming from the IMF to be able to see to it that Kenya does not say it will handle corruption, but actually goes about doing handling of corruption. So I believe with such conditionalities, we might see the government becoming more stricter in terms of how the funds that they are given are going to be utilized. But more importantly, and part of the conditions within the IMF is that whenever these funds are going to be applied for any particular project or for any particular expenditure, there has to be a project management unit that actually tracks how this money is used. Wherever there are dead projects, no money would be applied to that. Okay. There has to be a serious audit of every expenditure that the money that has been received will be utilized. And when we look at this from the safety net programs and Kazi Mtaani and all these things, they will now be under very close monitoring wherever this money will be utilized. So in my view, going forward, Kenya has placed itself under greater scrutiny as compared to the people we were borrowing money from before, who had no conscious regard of what we do with the money. But right now, the IMF is going to be with us all the way. The money that we have received, 255 billion, is going to be given in a phased format. So we might have gotten an approval for the entire amount, but it depends on how exactly are we behaving going forward. And even that will be closely monitored, considering that the government is having even more appetite to go and seek for about 1.3 trillion more from other concessionary loans and from the capital markets in future. So I think this is a welcome stance, right. And we as Kenyans need to push government to make sure that they meet these conditions that they have agreed to with the IMF.
Well, we sort of get the idea that Big Brother is watching, even though we'll be given a 3-year medium-term cycle to get our finances in order. Dr. Sauke, what say you about these conditions that come with the IMF? Because there are fears, as in the 1980s, our story just highlighted some of the structural adjustment programs that led to job losses in the public service and tax hikes. What say you about this? Might we see a fresh round of this?
Well, the fears of the SAPs, the famous SAPs, the structural adjustment programs of the 1980s, are actually well informed, because it really had a huge impact on the jobs of many people who are entrenched, those who lost their sources of employment. And I think that, considering the manner in which the conditions have been framed in the current loan, it might not have that kind of impact, because the key focus is mainly on the allowances and also the merging up of government of departments. And I think that, considering also the time in which we are in, government is also very keen on ensuring that the people, it does not have too much impact on people's income. So the question of people losing up jobs will be something that will be of public interest even to government. And so I think that I will not expect those stringent, that huge impact that the SABs of the 1980s have to be similar to the ones that the current loan that has been given to the government now will have. But then I think the whole question of the IMF deliberately setting up imploring on the government to set up a project office is actually a strategic direction towards towards IMF being able to being able to hold government accountable. They'll be able to use this office to ensure that, they track the usage of these monies to ensure that it goes into the intended purposes. So, as you have said, through that, the big brother will be watching, and I think that it will then set the pace as to whether they will get, the other faces of the money. And as opposed to the other loanings that have always been given, the idea of giving monies in phases, some of these Bretton Woods institutions have always used it to ensure that it is a monitoring and evaluation mechanism, so that the monies are used for the intended mechanism. And the other thing, when you look at the terms and conditions, the IMF and the other Bretton Woods institutions have also been trying to look on, galvanizing their former bases where they have been loaning. As opposed to the 80s when there was the axis of the East and the West, the current one, there was many countries had gone on getting loans from China because the conditions weren't too high, the conditions were not too tough, and so they also have to find a way of balancing up that so that they do not end up being too much into the conditions and lose up the clans.
Okay, so that's the latest. Bunyasi Sakwa, well, Parliament definitely plays a key role in terms of the authorization of debt. Talk to us about the latest news, because as we look forward, the debt ceiling might be breached in the next financial year that starts as of July, and perhaps that's why the Treasury is already petitioning Parliament to increase the debt ceiling yet again. Now, for Kenyans seated back at home who are wondering, why are we increasing at such a point? Perhaps speak truth to matter right now, dispel the rumors. What exactly is put into thought as we think about the debt ceiling and the next financial year? And perhaps the Division of Revenue bill sort of pointed fingers in terms of 1.17 billion should be used in terms of paying public debt, while 370 billion is going to the counties. Talk to us about this and your observation so far.
Thank you very much, Jesse. First of all, we must start, because we had been rushing to countries where the only conditionality is that you'll pay the debt on whatever terms they had agreed. But you do need to get someone who says, hey, really, are you going down the right path? But going back to this 9 trillion ceiling, remember, even the figure that we are using, that the central bank, they say the central bank data, 7.3, is in doubt. You remember a month or two ago, we were talking about 8.2 trillion, or perhaps 8.4 trillion, and many people have feel that we are probably well close to the 9 trillion ceiling that we are talking about. Now, 9 trillion was supposed to last until 2022, 23, or thereabouts, 23, 24, I forget exactly which year. And the city has come at least 2 years, almost 2 years in advance. And the projected 10.6 trillion level would have will be reached this year, for sure, reached this year, given the way the planned expenditures will be and the political processes that are underway that are not going to help grow the economy for quite some time, if they do at all. So my suspicion is we probably are hitting 9 trillion already now, and the increase they will be sticking has to be in the neighborhood of 12 to 15 trillion, 12 minimum, 15 perhaps being the upper limit, to contain the likely expenditure expansion that we shall get between now and 2022. But that problem partly is we understate the amount, the level, the amount of debt to be able to get to ride easy within the country, because then people see taxes rising. But the reality needs to come out. So, in fact, what I proposed in my public debt management bill would tighten both the pipeline of projects and tighten also the recording of debt, so that it's more accurate than has been the case. So the Parliament needs to be, I've seen this before, I'm a member of Parliament, but I want to say this. Parliament must stop being sycophantic, seeking to please the parties that put them in Parliament. They should look at what it means to run an economy well. And because Parliament doesn't always do that, we have been allowing annual budgets to move on with big debt. And I think that's something that really must stop. We can and we must stop it.
Okay, well, the role of Parliament definitely coming into foray. Gentlemen in studio, I'll only give you 1 minute, each 30 seconds. The way forward right now, let's start with you, Mwakesi. In terms of, IMF did mention that our public debt is sustainable. So the way forward, even with the debt ceiling going higher, should Kenyans anticipate for even tougher times?
I believe, Jesse, we are going to see additional debt coming from the government. I think they will be seeking additional debt over the next few financial years.
Okay.
But it's important that what we should be pushing for as a country and as a citizenry is that we start living within our means. We need to cut down on expenditure. Anything that is wasteful, let's do away with it. Let's not do any new projects. Let us put a freeze on new projects, and let us focus on ensuring that we're delivering projects that are helping Mwananchi grow better. Let's put more money in the hands of farmers. Let's put more money in terms of education that gives a skilled workforce. That is what we should be focused on. But anything else, let's put a freeze on, and so that we can be able to live within our means.
Dr. Churchill, as you give us your final take, we're talking earlier that borrowing has been entrenched even in the family setting. We saw the latest figures by Fuliza and the likes. So talk to us about this borrowing culture, even as we point fingers at the IMF on social media.
Yes, exactly. There's data that, Kenyans are borrowing about 1.2 billion a day. And I think this is because of the kind of high cost of living that the Kenyans are facing. And I think it's a pointer to that there is need for mechanisms of the overtaxation of the Kenyan is something that is so real, and I think this is one of the reasons why Kenyans are angered by the loans, because they are thinking that the only way that the government will want to repay up this loan is by taxing them more. So I think that is something that needs to be very keen. And I think just to conclude, it is important that as a country we need to think about expanding our economy, because the key thing about sustaining our debt, in as much as our debt is still at the sustainable level, the question of sustainability in future is something that is very significant, and we only sustain that by ensuring that our economy is able to produce. Just as the Mheshimiwa said, countries that have huge debt have been able to manage that because the amount of monies that they are getting from externally is a lot that they are able to manage their normal operations. If that is not the case, and we continue to borrow to pay up our normal operations, we will be hurting the future generations. Okay,
well, we definitely need to manage this going forward. Gentlemen, many thanks for your time. Dr. Churchill Saoke right there, governance expert. We're also joined with Stephen Mwakesi, who's a public policy analyst right here in studio. We appreciate your input, gentlemen. And by way of Zoom, Bunyasi Sakwa, a seasoned economist and the Member of Parliament for Nambale constituency. Always a pleasure to have you with us right here on Morning Express. Allow us to take a short break, but after this break, we shift focus to matters health. The world just recently celebrated World Health Day, and my colleague Trixie Ngado will have a look on matters COVID-19, the real science behind it, country and global perspective, as well as the safety lessons for Kenyans. Professor Mohammed Sheikh Omar, the Wajir South Member of Parliament, who has over 30 years of professional experience in the healthcare services, will help us dissect the issue together with Dr. Parag Ashok, a consulting physician. Stay with us.